He says, and I shall take you from among the Gentiles, verse 24, and I shall gather you out of all the lands, and shall bring you into your own land, and I shall sprinkle clean water on you. Now, here's the rebirth. Here's the water and the Spirit, see? He said, I'm going to sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness and from all your idols. I shall cleanse you, and I shall give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you, and I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh. And excuse me, verse 27, and put my spirit within you, and I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings, and shall do them. And you shall dwell in the land that I gave your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim, and I shall save you from all your uncleanness, and I shall call for the grain, etc. Okay, but we finished really with the uncleanness part right there. So look at what's happening here. Yeshua is saying that you have to be born of water and spirit. There's a new birth. What new birth is he talking about? Well, I want to read something back in John 3. You can just hold yourself here. He says to John 3, he goes to Nicodemus. In verse 9, he says, how is it, in verse 10, he says, Yeshua says, are you a teacher of Israel and you don't know this stuff? I mean, so a lot of people read this verse and go, why would he be picking on Nicodemus this way? Because Nicodemus should have known what happened here in Yeshayahu, and what happened here in Ezekiel, and what happened here in all these other places. Because how do you not understand this? You understand about this verse about clean water being sprinkled in Ezekiel 37 and a new spirit being put in. This is what Yeshua was talking about, because what was Yeshua about to start? The regathering from every place I scattered you. That's what Yeshua was about to start. You see now, have you ever heard this before? Have you ever heard anybody teach this before about the born again? Because people are not going back to connecting that everything Yeshua was talking about, especially to a leader of the Jews like Nicodemus, was based on stuff Nicodemus would have known. So here it is in Ezekiel 36. Let's continue. Go to Ezekiel 37. In verse 1, and the hand of Yahweh was upon me and took me out of the Spirit, by the Spirit of Yahweh, and set me down in the midst of the valley, and it was filled with bones. And he made me pass among them all around, and see, there was a very many on the surface of the valley, and see, they were very dry. And he said to me, Son of man, would these bones live? And I said, Master Yahweh, you know. And again he said to me, prophesy to these bones, and you shall say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. Thus said the Master Yahweh to these bones. By the way, you see where he says prophesy to the bones? What does prophecy mean? Remember the definition I've given you. It means to speak the word of Yahweh with authority. He's saying, speak my word to those bones with authority. He's not just saying speak the future or something. He says, go ahead and speak with my authority to those bones. He says, thus said the Master Yahweh to these bones, see, I am bringing you, ready, into you a spirit, and you shall live. Now the dry bones can be a literal valley of dead Israelites. It also could be a metaphor for them being spiritually dead, or being not in the fullness of the intent dead. In other words, their heart was not circumcised. They were still walking in the stiffness of neck, or they were walking in what was right in their own hearts, or the deception of their wicked hearts. And so here he goes. He says, I'm bringing a spirit into you, and you shall live. And I shall put sinews on you, and bring flesh upon you, and cover you with skin, and put a spirit in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am Yahweh. That's the key. When their heart is circumcised, they know that he is Yahweh. So with this washing of the water and this filling of the Spirit, we know that Yahweh is Yahweh. And I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and there was a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked and saw sinews and flesh come upon them, and skin covered them, and there was no spirit in them. And then he said to me, prophesy to the Spirit, prophesy, Son of man, and you shall say to the Spirit, thus said the Master Yahweh, come from the four winds, O Spirit, and breathe on these slain, so that they live. Then I prophesied, and he commanded me, and the Spirit came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, a very great army. And he said to me, Son of man, these bones are all the house of Israel. See, they say, our bones are dry, our expectancy has perished, and we ourselves have been cut off. See, there's a spiritual aspect here. Therefore prophesy, and you shall say to them, thus said the Master Yahweh, see, O my people, I am opening your graves, and shall bring you up from your graves, and shall bring you up into the land of Israel, and you shall know that I am Yahweh, when I open your graves, O my people, and bring you up from your graves, and I shall put my spirit in you, and you shall live, and I shall settle you in your own land, and you shall know that I am Yahweh, have spoken, and I've done it, declares Yahweh. Now, realize that this is no different than what he just said in chapter 36 about gathering them from wherever they were scattered. This is no different than in Hosea, where he says that you are now lo ami and lo ruchama, no longer my people and no longer having mercy. And he said, but in the same place that you were called lo ami, not my people, you shall be called what? The children of the living Elohim. So this is just another picture of the same thing, the rebirth. And so with the rebirth is a pouring out of the Spirit. Now, nobody here is, by the way, rolling on the floor, jumping up and down, or speaking in tongues. They are being given the blessing of insight and the strength to do the fullness of that what was originally intended. Israel was intended to be his people. They were intended to bring his name and reputation, his authority, glory, and honor. They were to be his representatives that would then draw the other nations of the earth to them so that they could point the people that are coming to them to him. That is their role. Our role as Israelites is to point people that are drawn to us to the creator of the universe. So then we get into, further on in the verses continue in chapter 37, we get the two sticks coming together, which shows you the context. Okay, so the context of the dry bones is the two sticks, where he says, look, I'm bringing together the stick of Ephraim and the stick of Judah, and I'm going to bring them together. And we're going to go to verse 21. He says, thus says the Master Yahweh, see, I'm taking the children of Israel from among the Gentiles where they have gone, and shall gather them from all around, and I'm going to bring them into their land. I'm going to make them one nation in the land, on the Mount of Israel. And there will be no longer two nations. I'm sort of skipping around a little bit. And they're going to no longer defile themselves with idols or their other disgusting matters. I shall save them from all their dwelling places, and I shall cleanse them. There's the water part. Cleansing always has water involved. So remember, we're talking about being reborn of water and spirit. There's the cleansing or mikvah or baptism, the washing of the word, all of that water metaphors, and then the infilling of or the indwelling of spirit. This is, by the way, for all those who don't think the Spirit showed up until Acts chapter 2. There's a lot of Spirit going on here way before Acts chapter 2. Okay, we're having a lot of talk about that. Okay, so hopefully we understand that that's what this is talking about here. And then we go back to John chapter 3. Actually, let's go to John chapter 4 for a second in verse 5. I'm sure we still haven't covered this water thing enough. John chapter 4 and verse 5. So he came to the city in Shomron called Shechem, near the piece of land Jacob gave to his son Joseph, and Yaakov fountain was there. So Yeshua, being wearied from the journey, was sitting thus at the fountain. It was about the 6th hour, and a woman of Shomron came to draw water, and Yeshua said to her, give me to drink. For his taught ones had gone off into the city to buy food. The woman of Shomron therefore said to him, how is it that you, being a Yehudite, ask a drink from me, a woman of Shomron? For the Jews do not associate with the Shomronites. And Yeshua answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of Elohim and who it is who says to you, give me to drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. So this is another piece of that water that's going on in chapter 3. We're now in chapter 4. We're getting more stories to point to this idea of rebirth and washing and cleansing and filling with water and spirit. And the woman said to him, verse 11, Master, you have no vessel, and the well is deep. From where then do you have this living water? Are you greater than our father Yaakov, who gave us the well and drank from it himself and his sons and his cattle? Yeshua said to her, everyone drinking of this water shall thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water I shall give him shall certainly never thirst. And the water I give him shall become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life, which is what Yeshua was talking to Nicodemus about. Hopefully we can start to see that. That's the connection to everlasting life. The woman said to him, Master, give me this water so I do not thirst nor come here to draw. Okay? So that's what's going on here. Okay? And by the way, he then takes us into not worshiping on the mountain and then worshiping in spirit and truth, which we've talked about before, had to do with in the fullness of the intent and the mechanics. Because we end up there in verse 22 where it says, you worship what you do not know, we worship what we know, because deliverance is of the Yehudim. But the hour is coming, and now is, when true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father does seek such to worship him. Elohim is spirit, and those who worship him need to worship in spirit and truth. And we've covered that very deeply in a previous teaching. Okay, but we have to understand now what that means about the Spirit and the truth. And that's, in my opinion, the Spirit then goes back to the fullness of the intent. The Spirit that was intended when we read that in Ezekiel and other places about pouring out His Spirit so that they can then walk with a circumcised heart. I mean, an uncircumcised heart is not going to work. They have to have that heart circumcised, and it's through the power of the Spirit where we're led and given the strength to circumcise our hearts. And so that's when we are then filled with the living waters, it's washed with the Word, all those kind of things, all those verses come together. Go to John 7. John chapter 7, and in verse 37. In John 7:37, on the last day, the great day of the festival, this is Sukkot, on the 8th day, Yeshua stood up and cried out, saying, if anyone thirsts, let him come to me, and let him who believes in me drink. As Scripture said, out of his inward most shall flow rivers of living water. And this he said concerning the Spirit, which those believing in him were about to receive, for the sanctified Spirit was not yet given, because Yeshua was not yet esteemed. Now think about this. I know we want to say that the Spirit wasn't given back to Acts, but you see, think of the group that he's talking to. The fullness of intent was not yet given to them. They still weren't getting it all the way until he was already resurrected. They still didn't get the fullness of it until at the end, what did it say he did? He opened up their eyes and their hearts and their ears, and he shared with them all the Scripture had to say about him. And so even the Yehudim, and especially his disciples, even at this point, had not had that information poured out on them yet. So while this is alluding to Acts chapter 2, it's also alluding to a very simple fact that, hey, they're still walking in half blindness. They're only seeing in part. They had not gotten to see in fullness of the intent. He only opened their eyes to all of that after his resurrection. But let's continue. Go back to John chapter 3. Okay, we're going back to John chapter 3. This is going to be tough to squeeze all in. We may have to continue even this part of John next week. Okay, in John chapter 3, so he says, continuing now, remember he said in verse 5, Yeshua said, truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and spirit, he's unable to enter into the reign of Elohim. Well, what did he say? He says, it's out of the rivers of living waters, you're going to get to enter into the reign of Elohim. You see, we've connected these dots. And the Spirit that's going to flow again so that you can enter into the kingdom. And he says, that which has been born of the flesh is flesh, and that which has been born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that he said to you, you have to be born from above. The Spirit breathes where it wishes, and you hear the sound of it. By the way, the word spirit there, ruach, could easily be wind. The wind, blows where it wishes, and you hear a sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from. And where it goes, so is everyone who has been born of the ruach, of the Spirit. So Nicodemus answered and said to him, how is it possible for this to take place? And Yeshua then said to him, are you a teacher in Israel and don't know this? Truly, truly, I say to you, we speak what we know and witness what we have seen, and you did not receive our witness. So now we're getting into some strong stuff here. By the way, in verse 8, when he says the Spirit or the wind blows as it does, and there's actually an allusion there to Ecclesiastes 11. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 11 real quick. You can hold your place here in John. Ecclesiastes 11, and in verse 5, it says, as you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of Elohim who makes all. Do you think that Yeshua was trying to hint at Ecclesiastes 11:5 to Nicodemus? Knowing he should know that? See, again, we have to be able to go back far enough to go through to say, hey, what is Yeshua talking about? And say, is there anything in the Tanakh that talks about this? That's part of the way you should be studying the Word. So now as we're going through this, he goes, oh, so when he's talking about the wind blowing where it wishes, and he's also talking about the womb here in John, look what happened in Ecclesiastes. It says about the bones growing together in the womb of a woman's womb, of the child growing together. Yet he's connecting it to the works of Elohim. He says, so you do not know the works of Elohim who makes all. So now let's go back to Nicodemus here in John chapter 3. And he's saying, look, he says, how are you a teacher and you don't know these things? He says, we have seen and you do not receive our witness. In verse 12, he says, if you do not believe when I spoke to you about earthly matters, how are you going to believe when I speak to you about heavenly matters?